Welcome to Threatsafe. This is our podcast to help SMEs and SMBs and the people who manage IT within those businesses or responsible for IT to get the very best from the technology that they deploy and then also to manage their cyber security. Let's listen to this week's podcast. Hello everybody and welcome to Threatsafe episode 3. I'm here with
Toby Stevenson, Chief Technology Officer at Neuways.
Which is, and I know I let you introduce yourself, Toby, every time, because I do know who you are, obviously.
I'm glad to know that. Thank you.
But and one day we should do this in reverse.
I'm Martin Roberts.
I'm Martin Roberts, Managing Director of Neuways. Toby Stevenson is the Chief Technology Officer at Neuways. So we said in previous episodes, we're opening this up a little bit. We used to talk about cyber almost exclusively, and what that actually meant was Toby, who's an absolute expert at cyber security and knows his stuff, did all the talking. And so for some sort of retribution, we're going to talk about IT strategy and the threat that IT strategy can do if not handled correctly, which allows me to talk more for Toby. This is where it goes. Okay, so some time ago, Toby, there was a white paper published, which I can talk about with some authority because I published it. Was about IT spend and how much you should be spending as a company on IT. I'm not going to go into that detail here because you can find that, and we'll put up something up later on about that and where to find it. What I wanted to talk about was the posture that your business has towards IT and how it's not right or wrong, it just describes what you are, and how actually the nuances about where that sits within the industry you work in and your competition. Yeah. And I'm gonna go through the different things as I've described them, and different types of approach to IT. So it's an approach to IT first, which is, first one is bleeding edge. So getting use of access to the latest technologies, sometimes in beta, allowing you to do stuff that other people aren't doing. And we'll come back to each one of these in a few seconds, talk about the risks for each one, if that's okay, Toby, because this is where your expertise will kick in. So we've got bleeding edge. Next one is leading edge. Leading edge, what would you say leading edge is, Toby, compared to bleeding edge?
Probably not necessarily pre-release or beta software, but someone that is taking advantage of the latest and greatest stuff as soon as it comes out. Okay.
Then my next one is Me Too. And again, I'll let you comment on that.
Yeah, that would be where there's an agreed or an understood, this is what everybody's doing, this is what everyone should be doing, and you kind of say, yeah, me too.
Yep. Good one. I spent many hours putting these together. I probably read it somewhere else and just rewrote it. Then we've got laggard. And how would you describe laggard attitude to IT?
More conservative than me too.
Yes. And not necessarily in a keen rush to be with the rest of the crowd.
No. It may not be done kicking and screaming, but it's certainly letting things settle down and not volunteering to advance perhaps quite as quickly as a Me Too type organisation.
Yeah. And probably fair to say, actually, not necessarily driven by trends. We'll come back to those again. Mm-hmm. And then we've got what I call super laggard.
Very, very conservative compared to Me Too.
Kicking and screaming, and only spending the money when it's absolutely and utterly necessary.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Would rather do anything other than invest in the IT systems.
What? Now we'll talk about whether it's investing or being sensible, or whatever. So now the truth is here, actually, no one attitude is correct or wrong. It depends what you're doing with your business, what competition you're doing. So we might describe, you might say, and I'm going to make a huge generalization here, okay, is that, and I hope nobody gets upset by this, but a funeral director, for instance, doesn't need top-notch bleeding-edge IT. Yeah, in fact, they could afford to be super laggard because they generally write things on bits of paper and post it, and they might do their accounts, but they don't need great IT.
They're not using IT to execute their business function, are they?
Precisely. And the thing about that is that being super laggard in that industry, that service, my apologies, folks, is perfectly acceptable. And you wouldn't need to differentiate yourself with IT. And actually, you could, just by being laggard, put yourself ahead in IT terms of all other funeral directors if there was a need to, if there's any advantage to it. So this is why the industry matters, and whether you want to differentiate yourself and whether you believe that IT can differentiate yourself. Now, so super laggard is probably the least of interest to us because not much happens in that world. We will just flip this out. We're actually working with somebody right now who is actually on that cusp of bleeding edge and leading edge because of the nature of the business. And we can't say who it is, but they need to use the very latest software, and sometimes before it becomes mainstream. And that is a way of differentiating themselves within their industry. It also presents a huge amount of problems. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And I think all of the approaches have to have their pros and cons, their benefits and their challenges, but yes.
Yeah. So from a security perspective, bleeding edges, would you describe it as being more challenging than all others?
I wouldn't say it was more challenging. The fact that it's the very latest stuff, the biggest, one of the big challenges is that there's normally a dearth of expertise in that technology. And so that makes the security challenging because people haven't been there, seen it, got the t-shirt around it. So they're discovering and learning and expanding on that technology all the time. Now, in some ways, that's great because it means that a lot of the legacy inherent security challenges don't necessarily exist because it's the very latest and greatest, and there's no incumbent legacy stuff that has to be considered. But on the flip side, it's not really been stress tested by the security community, so its safety in depth may be debatable or unproven is probably the safer way of saying it.
No, I mean, I'll say fortunately, I'm not quite sure if it is fortunate, but we don't have a lot of clients ourselves who are bleeding edge. I'm not entirely sure our nerves could stand it, but the other facets of that type of industry or that type of approach is you are learning new stuff every day, and managing that IT infrastructure and environment is also somewhat challenging. We find out new things ourselves in supporting such organisations.
Yeah, I mean, a great example would be, and this isn't this specific example, but if you think about the AI platform providers, that is developing at an exponential rate, and they're just having to run at full speed just to keep up with what everybody's doing and how it's all changing and developing. And so building in the necessary knowledge and understanding, this is what it does, is hard because next week it might be completely different because it's pivoted or it's flip-flopped to do something else or whatever. And so it's very agile. There's a rapid rate of change with it potentially, but it makes it hard to sit and rest on something and really understand it in real detail.
Yeah. So I guess that the features of companies who are oriented to leading edge technologies, that they're generally software development, they're doing things which are new and unusual and leading. But Now going back to take a step back along this path to leading edge, and these are people, to my mind and in my experience, who are in an industry. It's a fast moving industry. It relies on technology a lot, but occasionally an organization will go, we'll take ourselves, and it might be a Me Too organization who suddenly goes, we're going to go to leading edge now. We're going to start adopting stuff before our competitors do. They're all Me Too. How do we differentiate ourselves? We can't. We could do it with product. We could do it with service, and part of that service delivery might be going for a bleeding edge software solution or software delivery or service solution enabled by software, which should be along the leading edge stuff. So occasionally, we see people having, as we talk about, beta versions of software. Just talk about beta and what are the risks of those things and what's the general process.
Yeah, sure. So beta software typically is used to describe software that's not yet been released. So it's not reached its GA, its general availability. It's still being, it's mostly developed. It's mostly working out acceptance testing and bug fixes and things like that. But the core functionality is normally there. There is actually a predecessor to beta testing, which is alpha testing, which is where the core functionality is being nailed down and it will do this and it won't do that. And then beta testing is more about getting it ready to ship it. The challenge with beta testing is that invariably, because it's still a work in progress, things don't work. Or they work in a certain way today, and then next week they work in a different way because a bug has been fixed, or it's been agreed that that doing it in a different way is better. And so the real challenge with beta software is that it's still in flux. The die is not being cast yet. Getting support for it is invariably challenging because it's not been set in stone yet, and then those support procedures and documentation that don't typically tend to exist. It's often referred to as late beta software is often referred to as preview as well. So this is what we're about to ship, but it's not quite there, so it may change. That's a relatively recent Microsoft thing. A lot of their software and features are released in preview, and can be quite good because you get to see what these things look like before they're done. The problem is that they may then go behind a licensing paywall when they release because they're not intended for your license level. But digressing slightly, beta software is generally pretty stable. I mean, Gmail, which we know and love, was in beta for years and years and years and years before it lost the little beta logo off itself. So, it doesn't necessarily mean it's unstable per se, but it does mean that it's not yet in flux and it is subject to change. So, if you take a piece of beta software and you build some documentation around it and take all sorts of screenshots, by the time it gets released, some of those screenshots may no longer be valid.
Yeah, and for an organisation that chooses to do the bleeding edge stuff and leading edge stuff, is actually, can it differentiate? The key question is this going to give a differentiation in your marketplace against your competitors? And it can give you a huge advantage, but the risk, those are the risks that go with it, and of course the attendant security risks.
I think the other thing as well around bleeding edge and leading edge, it's not always just about using software that's not released yet. It might be using software in your industry for the first time. So it may actually be quite mature software, but it's the first time it's appeared in your industry.
Yes. So maybe CRM in the funeral directors thing.
Exactly. Yeah. Or online payments or something like that.
Yeah. Could be. Yeah. Okay. So then we're going to talk about now the people that we generally work with, which is Me Too, and this is using the latest proven versions of software and models. And I think we'll talk about this in a later podcast. Let's just talk about office productivity software. Everybody's using Office 365 or an equivalent these days. And it's driven by a couple of things. Well, one, actually, it's quite good. Two, it's a subscription model. And again, we'll talk about that in a later episode. But it just generally works very, very well. It's developing all the time. You get access to the latest features. And for us as an organisation supporting companies out there as an MSP or co-managed IT and such like, it's quite a nice place to be, isn't it, Sammy?
It is, yeah. And I think if you were to have said, looking back, if you turn back the clock maybe 5 or 6 years, maybe actually 365 wasn't Me Too. Maybe it was leading edge. Maybe it was the emerging thing, and there was there would have been some perceived risk about shifting your email from your server, safe and warm in the comms room, to something that sits in the cloud. And managed by Microsoft of all people. And I think the pandemic kind of forced the maturity of that technology and forced people to adopt and accept it. And it now is very much a Me Too tool. It's unusual to see an organisation that is not using that technology.
Yeah, I think it's probably fair to say, I'm sure we won't be the first people to say it, is that actually COVID, the pandemic, accelerated the whole process. I mean, we went through having, I won't say a handful of clients. We had quite a few clients who were using Office 365, but it was, as you said, a little bit leading edge. It was, people were adopting it, and they were early adopters. To almost overnight, everyone using it, and we wouldn't be sitting where we are today on Teams doing a thingy, podcast, video cast, whatever, probably without the pandemic.
No, that's right. Email in the cloud was perhaps less contentious, but certainly widespread collaboration, cloud-based file sharing. Again, these were all seen as niche and maybe leading edge. Certain industries would have made more use of them than others, whereas now it seems to be almost like it's the go-to. It's this is what we want. This is what we're having. This is what we're using. This is what people expect.
Yeah. Okay. So it's worthwhile restating then that if you are currently Me Too, and you think that technology can differentiate yourselves, there's probably enough bandwidth, if you want to call it that, within the Me Too thing to use, using CRM, using ERP, using etc. That would actually, whilst you're Me Too, you could still be graduated above your competitors in your marketplace just by using it slightly better or somewhat better than those people. So you could be Me Too without becoming leading edge or heading towards leading edge without taking the same level of risk. It's worth probably stating. Now, we go into areas where it's less fun for us, but it's keeping the lights on. And I actually understand entirely why businesses make these decisions. And we'll talk about the laggard, which is, I don't want to spend this money unless it's absolutely necessary. I don't need this technology. So it's two things. Do I need this new technology? Do I need to have the latest Me Too stuff? And the reality is, you don't know. Your business. You own your business. You run your business. You know if you can differentiate yourself with that technology. If you decide you don't need to, that's fine. You might see other competitors go off and do it, and you might see what happens. But yeah, do you need to? I can understand people not wanting to spend that money to be Me Too. Your thoughts, Toby?
Yeah, from an IT person's perspective, Me Too is a nice place to be, and laggard and super laggard are get frustrating. I can kind of see why, and it makes sense from a business perspective to maximize the investment in an IT system or a particular IT asset. I think that probably there's a bit of a double-edged sword with it. I think that on the one hand, it's a proven environment. You know that it's stable and it's working well and it's fit for purpose. So there's kind of a risk reduction aspect to that. But then on the flip side is because it's a little bit older, maybe you don't get some of the latest security whiz bangs that other people are taking advantage of, or maybe certain bits of software stop working with your platform, because although it may not be super old, the vendors you're working with may choose not to support integration with that particular version of software. So that starts to become a challenging thing, because then compromises need to be made. How do you mitigate the fact that I no longer have this integration, or this piece of software will no longer work, and then it ends up disrupting things? So I think LagGuard absolutely has its place in certain industries. It makes a lot of sense where technology isn't a huge differentiator. It just makes sense to sit on something that's known to work, and actually you get the reward because it's super stable, super reliable, it's well baked in. But you start to come on the cusp of some of these interoperability, compatibility, and security challenges where the world around you is evolving and moving on, and your environment is not.
Now, we'll talk about this a little bit more in the next episode, actually, because it's about the nature of buying software and hardware and buying the technology, and that has affected this laggard Me Too positioning, and we'll talk about that next time. And then we've got people who we occasionally deal with, which is super laggard, and it's actually quite an interesting thing, because actually super laggard 20 years ago, Toby, was people who still use pen and paper, and actually we very rarely spoke to. A super laggard today is somebody who's got servers which are 10 years old, with software they purchased years ago, and it works, it's solid. Fortunately, we have a few, because we look after anybody. It is super stable, but they do, it has to be said, they do operate in industries where it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that they're unlikely to be compromised. They don't use technology in such a way that it runs the whole operation, and being without it for a few days would be a disaster. And it can suit some people, and maybe they're slightly richer because of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I say it's definitely those organisations that are not leveraging technology for competitive advantage. It's not intrinsic to the way that they're working. You're right in on one hand that the systems have been in place for a long time, so therefore they're inherently stable and they work. The problem is that when they stop being inherently stable and they stop working, is that you then end up with this void of supportability. So we've seen issues where very, very old hardware develops a problem, and getting spare parts for it is increasingly tricky. Vendors are starting to remove the support pages for products that they no longer support. So that online wealth of information that used to exist suddenly doesn't. So you can't go and say, what does this error code mean on this old piece of software? Can't find it, any reference to it anymore. And then those two pieces combined then start to introduce instabilities. Or if you try to, you've got some other software installed on there that actually is being updated. Does that introduce an instability? Because that gets updated and it can no longer work, and something falls over. So if you can operate like boy in the bubble style, completely isolated from the rest of the world, then in theory it could chug on for ad infinitum until the hardware gives up the ghost. Because for the most part, if you're not prodding it and poking it, software just doesn't stop working. It's normally the underlying hardware that causes a problem. Now, you may have some software corruption, but it's normally caused by hardware. Bearing in mind that equipment of this age is probably running spinny disks, which we know like to fail after a period of time. And there's an accumulation of crud and detritus inside the machine, where even in the cleanest environment, dust and muck gets sucked inside and coats the internals. things that have got bearings in, so fans and motors for hard drives and things like that. Invariably, they have a reasonable service life, and you can start to see those kinds of failures. And the added challenge is that a lot of the things that we perhaps take for granted when you're looking at the Me Too and above world is that some of the advanced recovery technologies are not relevant to this environment because they were too old to support it, so they can't do it. So there is a danger that you can not see the risks that are there with these things just because it's working.
And I think we have sat in front of people who have had that. What turns out to be a position which is about not spending money, suddenly having something called a technology deficit.
Technical debt, I like to refer to it as.
Technical debt, where suddenly they've got years worth of spend that they really should have done, need to be done in the next 3 months. Okay, so there we are. We've talked about that gamut of approaches to IT within industries. Super laggard, Me Too, leading edge and bleeding edge. Next time we'll talk about some of the challenges that also brings in terms of spend and budgeting and such like. Thank you very much for that, Toby. I do hope that people who are listening and, goodness me, watching, are enjoying this going off just cybersecurity. Everything has a cyber aspect to it, but it's about the challenges that your businesses face. If you're in charge of IT, manage IT, but not necessarily delivering it to your business. So thank you very much for listening or watching if you've been very brave, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Toby.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to Threatsafe. We hope you found it enjoyable and informative. Please reach out with any comments, feedback, questions, and we look forward to seeing you soon.